Just a few short months ago, Dream finally cleared his name of the many accusations he was facing. But seemingly overnight, several of his friends are facing allegations that they're admitting to. Well, kind of, but not really, but almost. Look, it's complicated, especially with hours of streams, dozens of tweets, and a very confusing Twitter space.
I love George. I think that obviously he's been my best friend for a very long time, and that doesn't matter.
It has been impossible to keep up. So how did Dream go from clearing his name of accusations to possibly being ruined by everyone else's? Well, it has a lot to do with the very thing that helped make Dream famous, the Dream Survival Multiplayer, or Dream SMP, which was essentially a shared Minecraft world where the creators involved would roleplay and create storylines. As Dream said, this focused on using Minecraft as a storytelling medium as opposed to a game, and thanks to the ingenuity of the idea, combined with, well, everyone being trapped inside for a while, this series took off, furthering if not outright launching the careers of various Minecraft creators. However, in the time since the series came to a close, Minecraft on YouTube has become somewhat synonymous with controversy and allegations, and the past few weeks have seen this trend spread to the members of Dream SMP. This started with Wilbur Soot being accused of physical abuse,
and eventually he did acknowledge how bad it looked that I was covered in bruises all the time,
which then inspired someone to come out and accuse GeorgeNotFound of inappropriate contact.
I was scared of him and all of those who surrounded him. I was scared of his power. I was scared I was mistaken.
And then of course, Dream got roped into all of this.
I had, no idea whatsoever that anything sexual took place in any way whatsoever.
So to make sense of this, let's start at the beginning with Wilbur Soot. Now Wilbur is unsurprisingly a huge Minecraft YouTuber and musician. And no, I don't know why every Minecrafter does music and gets accusations. Those answers are above my pay grade. But problems arose on February 21st when Shelby, better known as the creator Shovel, came out and painted a disturbing picture of her experience with an unnamed ex, later revealed to be Wilbur.
And I was being hurt in my last relationship.
An experience that has been greatly weighing on her for quite some time.
Silence has always brought me peace, and this time it feels like my silence is not keeping my peace. It's only keeping somebody else's peace. It took me 10 months after to heal, and I spoke with multiple therapists and tried different forms of therapy.
Because simply put, her relationship with Wilbur was one that saw frequent violence, though not the kind you would expect.
When I hear about physical abuse, I think of hitting, and it didn't start as something that he did to hurt me. He had this habit of biting, and he said it was just affectionate. I think that might have been true maybe at the start, but I also feel that I have good reason to believe that every part of it was a lie.
Yeah, biting as a form of affection. And while this started innocently enough, that didn't last long.
And I don't specifically remember the actual first time that he bit me too hard by accident because I didn't think that it would be significant. I thought that it would only happen once. He started biting me more and more over a period of time, sort of throughout the whole relationship, and accidents of him biting too hard and really hurting me happened more and more frequently.
So yes, this quirk quickly turned into a clear problem. So in order to find a balance, Wilbur and Shelby established a safe word that would prevent further injury. Any guesses how that went?
And I needed him to really stop biting so hard. I didn't like it, and I tried telling him, and then he started saying things like, it was my pain tolerance that was too low, or I'm exaggerating how much it actually hurts. He's not even biting that hard. I'm being dramatic. But his biting escalated to a point where I was covered in bruises all over my arms, and they hurt, and he would poke at them for fun.
And already that's pretty concerning, right? Essentially ignoring an established safe word leading to recurring pain. But it goes even further. As Shelby explained, Wilbur would basically try and write the narrative of their relationship both verbally and physically.
And he even felt so comfortable showing off my bruises that he had caused to our friends because he would bite me so hard by accident. By accident, he would even joke that it looked like he abused me. And eventually he did acknowledge how bad it looked that I was covered in bruises all the time. So he stopped biting my arms as often, and he started biting my legs instead.
While also repeatedly bringing up his ability to abuse her unprompted, despite knowing that Shelby had past experiences that would make this triggering for her.
He pinned me down and asked me to try my absolute hardest to get him off of me. And I couldn't do it, obviously. And he said something to make the point that he was so much stronger than me that I wouldn't be able to fight him back. Fight back against what? What do you mean? You don't say like that to people? That's insane. And I was also sexually assaulted by my first boyfriend, and he knew that.
As well as exploiting their safe word even further.
And it was in the last couple of months of the relationship that every time he bit me, it was until I needed to use this safe word, which meant I was being hurt multiple times a day. And when I asked him to stop again, this time he said, "This is who he is. He isn't going to change."
And surely enough, this escalated into Wilbur outright ignoring the safe word.
Now sometimes he would bite me and I would yell out the safe word because it hurt so bad, he'd clamp down even harder. And sometimes he'd grind his teeth down on my skin. And sometimes he'd smile after, like a gloating grin.
Which of course led to Shelby being constantly on edge, because she never knew when she was going to be hurt again.
And during this time, I was filled with so much anxiety all the time that I was constantly nauseous, gagging daily, on occasion throwing up because of the pit that was in my stomach.
Shelby also detailed Wilbur engaging in what she identified as love bombing once he took an interest in her, basically where he overwhelmed her with affection and promise for the future.
And looking back, I do believe that the way I was swept off my feet at the beginning of this relationship was 100% love bombing. He made these huge romantic gestures. He wrote me the most beautiful love letter that I had ever read. He called me his soulmate. He talked about forever 1 month in. He told me he hadn't been in a relationship in 5 years. He thought he could never find love again before he met me. He said he wanted someone to grow with. He wanted to be a dad. He had all his names picked out.
Only to shift into cold indifference without any trigger.
Now all of a sudden he's telling me he's not sure he wants kids at all. In fact, he has never been attached to the idea of kids. And I asked if he still wanted marriage. He said he wanted to marry me. And then he said, now, I'm not quote, "I'm not the commitment guy, you know that."
And after the dynamic continued to decline, Shelby eventually made the decision to leave.
But then he also admitted to me that he had grown to resent me. And I have to be thankful that he said that bit out loud, because that was the last push that I needed to get myself out.
And upon sharing her story, Shelby received a ton of praise, and it's easy to see why. Like, yes, it's good to approach these situations with a critical eye, as we've seen. However, I can't stress enough how much I think Shelby nailed telling her story. It's honestly impressive. Like, I've expressed the opinion that the main reason someone should publicize claims of mistreatment online is because they have a reasonable suspicion that it is going to happen to someone else, and there is no other way to stop it. Because otherwise, it is really difficult to have an unbiased perspective, and it is really easy to slip into unjust revenge. But Shelby basically took those words out of my mouth, stating that that was among her motivations.
And I say all of this because I believe he is dangerous. He was willing to do harm to someone he claimed to love more than anyone he has ever loved. His actions escalated. And I don't think that I'll be the last person that he hurts. And I felt like sharing my story was really important to warn people.
She also was as clear and specific as possible when making her claims and refrained from using any vague language that would lead to confusion or false assumptions. And while it's foolish to pursue the perfect victim, Shelby's story seems like a genuine effort to do good beyond just personal catharsis. And because of how she handled it, this seems like the exact kind of story that would inspire others to come forward, which it did. This included someone sharing similar experiences with Wilbur that escalated to SA, though the person in question specifically asked for their story to not be covered on YouTube, so I'm going to respect her wishes and not go into detail. However, I will quickly note that there were pictures of this individual with Wilbur, and Shelby responded to the story with support, but nothing else has been said on this accusation since. But that's not where the story ends, because within a week of Shelby coming forward, Wilbur tweeted out a statement that attempted to respond to her story, and this started with an apologetic tone, with Wilbur saying, "During our relationship's final months, I regrettably became slobbish, disrespectful, and selfish. These actions caused a lot of pain to my ex-girlfriend, and I've since sought therapy to address these behaviors." But this quickly turned into Wilbur defending himself, with him going on to say, "The allegation of abuse, particularly in the form of biting, deeply shocked me. Throughout our relationship, I understood from our numerous conversations and text message exchanges on the subject that this behavior was consensual, playful, and reciprocally enjoyed. I truly believe those personal messages exchanged reflect mutual affection and understanding. Out of respect for her, I choose not to publish them." And yeah, this statement was received horribly. I mean, before anything else, it feels weird for him to say that he has messages that clear his name, but he won't release them? Like, that either feels like a bad lie or blackmail to me. I don't know. Also, creators were quick to criticize Wilbur for centering the agency of his response around himself rather than the victim. Though surprisingly, Wilbur's harshest critic was actually Dream himself, whose response to Wilbur's statement actually received more likes. And this is all pretty surprising given that Wilbur was a founding member of the Dream SMP, with Dream saying, "She said she withdrew consent using a safe word and that you frequently would intentionally bite down harder afterward to the point that she would scream." Even isolated from everything else, that is clearly abuse. You seem to think that you did nothing abusive, and the statement is built on that foundation. Therapy won't help if you seriously describe your abusive actions as playful, affectionate, and especially consensual. And overall, the internet stood with Shelby, with Wilbur losing 250,000 subscribers and counting and being removed from a current survival multiplayer series by Quackity. And other than Shelby tweeting out a statement of appreciation for people's support and Wilbur cleaning house with his mods, the situation seems to be winding down. Though I mentioned that there were accusations that go beyond just Wilbur, accusations that cause problems for Dream himself, and that's because there were. More specifically, a series of allegations have come out against the creator known as GeorgeNotFound. And while Wilbur's controversy was seen as pretty cut and dry, George's situation has gone on to deeply divide the internet, to the point that reactions range from rage at George,
"My friend cried in my f***ing arms about this, and you're on stream denying it all, denying the f***ing hurt that you caused to her. You are disgusting f***ing people, you and all of your abuse sympathizer friends,"
to calling the accuser lucky.
It's like, you are lucky. You're lucky that that was the only thing that happened. This is such a lucky lesson learned.
Yeah, let's try to make sense of this. This all started with a streamer by the name of Katie Bugs. See, Katie came out and shared her own experience with an unnamed Minecraft creator, having been inspired by Shelby.
Last year, at the beginning of summer, I was assaulted by a significantly older and popular content creator. And if it wasn't for Shelby, I would have never realized my silence was bringing me everything except peace.
And much like with Wilbur, once Katie told her story, it wasn't long before fingers were pointing at George. Only this time, things quickly escalated into chaos. According to Katie, she was attending VidCon with her friend when said friend had formed a connection with the creator who was friends with George. This led to Katie and her friends attending 2 parties in Dream's hotel room, and it was at the second party that George engaged in what Katie labeled as an assault. You see, during these gatherings, George began to take an interest in Katie despite him being 26 and her only 18, and Katie claims that he was aware of this age gap by their second meeting.
The guy's friend had been passing flirts at me the entire night, but because he was the oldest in the room, we assumed he didn't know my age. Later that night, when I left, I received Instagram DMs from him, and in my Instagram bio, in bold, was my age, 18, confirming he knew how old I was.
Now, their first interaction went off without much issue. They played drinking games and went their separate ways. However, during their second night together, Katie was back in the hotel room with some of her friends, some of George's, and of course George himself. Katie then claims that when arriving that night, she had already drank to the point of others becoming concerned.
And I was drunker than the night before and was willing to go anywhere. I remember a friend seeing me in the lobby. On the way, they were worried by the way I was acting and asked if I was okay. I was really drunk, and it was an eerie feeling, like they could sense something was wrong, and I wonder what would have happened if I had picked up on it.
And she describes being pressured to drink more as the night went on.
At the time, all of us girls were already really drunk from the party we were coming from, stumbling and everything. There was more alcohol in the room, and we were encouraged to drink some more as they offered the bottles to us. They said they would join us in drinking and insisted on drinking games, and, already drunk, I obviously complied.
And this turned into what Katie has identified as an assault, where George tickled Katie below her shirt while they were both drunk.
And I wondered how he felt sitting so close to me. It was a little after that, when I had resorted to playing games on my phone when it happened. Out of nowhere, I felt him slip his hand under my clothes, sitting next to me on the couch in front of everyone. He disguised it with a simple, "Are you ticklish?" I coughed out a no, still staring at my phone. I was overly aware of the fact that everyone else was sitting around us, watching us, including my best friend. I was scared, and I felt sick, either from the alcohol or from his touch. It didn't matter because my mind was a blur. I remember being afraid to even breathe.
And while they had some minor interactions afterwards, they ultimately lost touch. Katie then detailed how they processed the event going forward.
At the time of it all, I convinced myself I was lucky. I was excited to be around such big creators. I figured that's just how things were, that was the price I had to pay to be there. that anyone would have loved to be in my position and that I should have appreciated it.
And how this rationalization turned into processing that it was a traumatic experience.
I felt dirty in a way that I couldn't wash off. I changed after that. I used to be kind. I'm angry a lot of the time now at that person, at myself. I can't stop thinking about who I was before it all, who I'll never be again.
And after sharing their story, Katie reflected on it as a whole.
The idea of will I ever heal, it's scary. I feel everything very strongly and I don't want that to change. It was a big deal to me, and I spent too much time downplaying my own experiences. I wanted to stay strong for you guys. I live this every night and every morning. With every touch, I relive that room.
And right away, I think you can see why this is so much messier than Wilbur. This wasn't a pattern of behavior, and there wasn't a clear no verbalized during the encounter.
I technically never said no, I suppose. But I never said yes.
And it only gets worse. To the point that George himself went from having the internet against him to having most of their support, to them completely turning on him, to now largely supporting him. And this correlated with the 4 main statements that have been made by Katie and George. Starting with Katie's stream where she aired these accusations, and then George's video responding, then Katie posting a 10-page Twitter response providing evidence of her claims, and then most recently, George's second response video that argued that at least some of Katie's evidence was false. Yeah, it's a lot. See, initially, George made a video where he shared his perspective on these events, which started with George addressing Katie's age.
It was actually around this point, after VidCon had finished and we were messaging, that I found out her age. And since then, I never pursued anything going forward, and I essentially stopped messaging her. Her last message to me was August 1st, 2023, and I haven't replied to her since then.
He also refuted points that he argued seem minor, but ultimately reframed how the events transpired.
So something I actually want to point out before I continue with the rest of the story is the way that she phrases some things in her story. She said that one friend was invited by Dream, but she didn't want to go alone. So then they decided to go along with her because they were willing to go anywhere. You can see in these screenshots from the text at the time that they were all trying to come to the hotel, and it wasn't just oh, we're willing to follow her. There was a couch in the room, and I sit next to Katie. She also says, looking back on the scenario, that she confused her nerves for excitement when I sit next to her. But again, at this moment in time, everything was friendly, nothing sexual had happened. I'm just literally sitting next to her on the couch. And during this, she was laughing, smiling. She gave no indication that she was uncomfortable with me sitting this close to her.
He also explained why he believed that the interactions were positive overall, including George and Katie keeping in contact after the night in question.
She wasn't being awkward at all. There was no sense of uncomfortability from her. She was laughing and playing with everyone. And yeah, I'm not really sure why she phrased it like this. We actually continued to send each other high score updates even weeks after the event.
And George also clarifies that Katie was never pressured to drink.
They had also been the ones that were asking to play the drinking games. So instead of us insisting that we play it, they were actually the ones that were asking us. And you can see that in the screenshots here. They had actually texted multiple times, specifically wanting to play this drinking game that we had played the night before.
He then expands on the physical contact that they had shared that night, including the fact that there was prolonged contact before the alleged assault that Katie did not express issue with.
During this, me and Katie were at the far end of the couch and we were cuddling together. We had been cuddling for, I'd say, around an hour at this point, playing the game, talking, and just having fun.
Which leads into the moment of the alleged assault. Well, kind of. Because George clarified that it wasn't actually a moment at all, but instead a prolonged interaction where he feels he gave her ample time to express a lack of interest or consent should the need arise.
As I mentioned before, we had previously been cuddling on this couch for around an hour, but I did place my hand on her waist under her shirt. The way it's phrased makes it sound like it just happened out of nowhere, when in reality we had been cuddling for over an hour at this point, and it was not out of nowhere. It was also around half an hour until I started moving my hand further up, and the way it's phrased just makes it seem like it happened pretty instantly and pretty quickly. There was nothing quick about it, it was very slow, and I was very cautious about it and making sure that she was comfortable throughout the process. Nothing came out of nowhere, everything progressed very slowly throughout the night.
And while verbal consent was not gained, George argues that he took care to ensure that her body language and demeanor were indicative of consent.
Me and Katie were very touchy, very cuddly, and very slowly got more intimate. Now obviously people don't typically ask if everything is okay, even such as touching someone's waist under their shirt before they do it. But in this case, I was extremely slow, and she was engaging with me the entire time, laughing, cuddling with me, and even playfully fighting me for the game that we were playing. Of course, I don't believe that silence is consent. I just want to make sure that it is abundantly clear. She was visibly and physically responding well to everything that we were doing.
He also notes that while Katie claimed to have removed herself from the situation at first chance, there were multiple moments where she would be separated from George or be presented with an opportunity to leave, only to choose to spend more time with him.
I also want to comment on how she said that she had to stand up after many minutes for it to stop. She did get up multiple times throughout the night. For example, to go to the bathroom, to get a drink. Also, when her friends left, she got up to say goodbye to them, and she would come back to the same scenario. I also just want to point out that her best friend was here during this whole process, then afterwards did leave. And I think it is important to note that she made the choice to stay behind for many hours more. And as I mentioned before, she did get up, say goodbye to them, and came back.
He also makes note of a moment where Katie detailed George following her.
I went to leave, and the older guy decided to leave with me. We walked to the elevators, where I didn't get on. He then pretended that the elevator was broken and that he couldn't leave, telling me to get in the elevator to prove it was broken. And then after a few minutes, he ended the night with a "guess I'm going now,"
but noted that the opposite had actually occurred.
So Katie actually had her own hotel room on the same floor as Dream. So she actually didn't have to take the elevator. She walked me to the elevator when she didn't have to and said goodnight to me, which was nice of her. I did joke with her about coming in the elevator. She didn't go along with it, which I respectfully took, obviously, and ended up just going down to my room. So yeah, she didn't have to take the elevator, yet she chose to walk with me to the elevator to say goodnight to me, which I think is interesting given how she's saying how she was so upset with it.
And the main point that George lands on is that Katie's story is one of personal regret rather than him infringing upon her consent.
But also I think these comments are her looking back on the night and not her actual feelings at the time. And one thing that I think is very important to differentiate here is that I do believe that she regrets being affectionate with me, and that really does make me feel terrible. But what's important to differentiate is that she was uncomfortable with this after the fact and not during. You're completely allowed to feel that way. But what isn't okay, and I think is just completely unfair, is to act as if I am the bad person in the scenario because you changed your mind later. And I just think it's completely unfair to judge me and my actions based on how you feel about it now 8 months later versus how you felt at the time. Because at the time, you were not uncomfortable with it. And I know I'm repeating myself a million times, but I have to. You were smiling, happy, laughing, playing along with it. Everything.
George then ends his video by providing a theory on why Katie may have come forward in the way that she did.
Now, I don't think she's purposefully being malicious or trying to hurt me or ruin my career or anything like that. But what I do think is that she is surrounded by a friend group that completely despises me and my friend group, but she clearly told them about this scenario. Now, when these people that are around you all completely despise me and my friends, they're obviously going to look on this poorly. Obviously, that is going to affect the way that you view the experience. And it's going to make you look at it differently. You're going to second guess it. You're going to be thinking about it. And clearly, it changed the way that she thought about it.
As well as making it clear that he still wants to see his audience supporting victims going forward.
And that's all I really have to say on the matter. Still keep supporting victims.
So yeah, I think it's clear why this situation devolved into chaos so quickly. Because when Wilbur responded to the accusations against them, he either apologized or entirely ignored them. He didn't outright deny anything, whereas George was denying things in great detail, often with messages that corroborate his claims. And at first, George's video was received fairly well, but that didn't stop things from escalating further, thanks in part to, well, Dream. See, unlike with Wilbur, Dream was actually present for the two interactions between Katie and George. After all, the parties were being held in Dream's hotel room. So after George posted his video, Dream took to Reddit in hopes of providing his version of these nights, stating that George's recollection is a more accurate depiction than Katie's, and that it was reasonable for George to think that Katie consented, especially given her repeatedly getting up and sitting back down next to him. Dream then mentions that the situation had previously caused problems when another creator, Harry, accused Dream of bringing 18-year-old girls back to his hotel so they could drink, referencing this event. This led to Dream speaking to Katie's friend, Ghosty, who was also present present for these parties. It was at this point that Dream says that Ghosty agreed that nothing nefarious took place that night. Dream also agreed with George's sentiment that there is a group of creators that dislike them and were likely pulling strings in order to turn these events into the controversy it now is. So okay, Dream and George formed a united front with a pretty consistent story, but just days ago they both actually retracted their statements because of new information. New information that led to Dream hosting a really weird 40-minute Twitter space, one where he mostly just talks in circles.
I'm just going to be speaking from my feelings and my thoughts. And so, I know every word will probably be analyzed, but just know that this is just me and my pure thoughts. And it's not, I don't know exactly what I'm going to say.
But he also just says some things that are kind of weird, like Dream saying he wasn't aware of anything sexual happening.
And I had, no idea whatsoever that anything sexual took place in any way whatsoever.
But the only thing somewhat fitting that description was George tickling her, which Dream was there for by his own omission. Dream then went on to walk back his initial statement, specifically saying that his previous comments on nonverbal consent did not apply here.
Consent must be explicit. Yes, you can have nonverbal consent, like I mentioned. Now, when I was writing this, of course, I'm thinking from my perspective of my experiences with consent. I have experienced nonverbal consent, but also all those experiences have been with being in a relationship, or being with somebody that you've already been with, many times, or and that is different. And I did not think about that or really acknowledge that.
And that in George's position, he would have acted differently.
Someone that I was talking to about this before Katie's second post, they asked me, they said, oh, well, would you have done what George did? And I said no. And then of course, the next logical question is, well, why? And me answering that question very much changed my perspective as well. I don't know this person. I don't know this person's body language, and I would have felt uncomfortable doing anything. So that obviously made me rethink how I was thinking about the specifics of the situation.
But clarifies that he does not think George acted in malice.
I do not think that George is a bad person. I do not think that George was sitting there thinking, she's not going to like this, or, anything.
And then Dream's Twitter space came to an abrupt end.
I love George. I think that obviously he's been my best friend for a very long time. Yeah, I don't know what else I can really add. This isn't about me. This is about Katie. So I guess I'll reiterate. I'm sorry, Katie. I really am.
So what new information could have caused such dramatic shift? Well, in response to George's first video, Katie released a 10-page statement where she attempts to provide evidence of her claims for the first time. So this shift happened during the few days where George was preparing a video directly responding to this document, a video that was just released. Now, in order to keep this simple, I'm going to go through Katie's document while interjecting with George's response when necessary, and then clarify any additional information provided by George after. Though I want to make note of George's reasoning for why he and Dream at least partially retracted their original responses.
So next she agrees with me that she didn't mention my online friend that I just met that day. And she shows a text message that she says is from him from the night where this happened, where he says this. Obviously, this is implying that he was kind of uncomfortable with what was happening, and also that he knew her age, despite just meeting her. And when I first saw this actually majorly changed my perspective on the night, because that would mean that my friend was also uncomfortable and somehow knew her age when I didn't. Dream also came to me and mentioned that this changed his perspective of the night as well, because that would mean that he was essentially the only person that wasn't uncomfortable, and that therefore he should have known. This really concerned me. I kind of was just sitting there like, really thinking, how could this have happened?
And it turns out that message was apparently faked, so let's try to make sense of all this. Simply put, Katie's second statement was immediately criticized for featuring several instances of her story changing, as well as things that were omitted from her original stream, most notably messages. See, Katie included messages that were allegedly from her friends checking in with her the day after this all went down, where they were vocalizing that they were concerned about her interactions with George. And this raised some red flags. For starters, why weren't these messages included or even mentioned in her original stream, especially when there was apparently a third message from George's own friend expressing similar concerns. It just seemed like a strange omission, especially since messages can be faked pretty easily. Not to mention that these messages just so happened to perfectly respond to George's claims that everyone else in the room found their interactions acceptable. And according to George, the most damning of those messages, the one from his friend, was actually not from him at all.
I didn't send that text. I found out about it when you sent it to me. But yeah, no, that wasn't me. I don't know where they got that from. I didn't ask them for any of their phone numbers or anything like that.
Which led to us hearing yet another version of that night's events.
I didn't really notice anything out of the ordinary. I didn't really notice any like bad vibes or anything like that. It was a little playful, maybe a little flirty. I noticed you guys were just kind of like playing with each other and just like kind of cuddled up a little bit on the couch. So it definitely didn't seem like she was like uncomfortable, you know? The way she was explaining everything, I mean, at least to me, like it was not like that at all.
As well as George's friend giving his thoughts on how much that night has been blown up.
It's just fucking wild that like this whole situation came from like that night. It was just like mind boggling, dude. I couldn't really believe it. Like half I was saying, like as someone that was there, like other ways that I've heard it being like described, like from what I was like reading and watching online, is actually kind of insane.
And George provides Katie's explanation to how such a major oversight happened.
Obviously, they wouldn't just show this screenshot if it was fake, because I could disprove that pretty easily. So I had Dream reach out to get some clarification on it. So they replied back and essentially just said that it was an accident and that Katie had gotten confused on who said what.
And after sitting down with this for a couple of hours, I don't understand how it's possible that those messages weren't faked, or at least intentionally tampered with by someone. For starters, here's who Katie says was there that night.
Back at the hotel room again were the two friends and us three girls.
Katie also said that the messages was between two people that were in the room, which must be true, as Katie would be aware if the receiver wasn't in the room since they sent her this screenshot, and the sender obviously saw George and Katie. So okay, we need two people that this message could have been between. We know that Katie, Dream, George are out, which only leaves Katie's two friends. But if they messaged each other, I don't think this confusion would be possible for reasons I'll get into. But George also gave a different headcount for who was in and out of the room that night.
But Katie, her best friend, and 3 other of her friends ended up coming to the room, which had me, Dream, and my online friend that I just met. So 8 people total in this room at this point.
So let's work with that count. We need 2 people, a receiver and a sender. It still wasn't Dream, George, his friend, or Katie, and it wasn't the mutual friend because that would have been easily clarified when Dream reached out to Katie. So again, if this is real, is it just a message between 2 of Katie's friends? Because how do you not catch that when getting the screenshot? Like looking at the screenshot itself, it seems to be a preview of the last message that the receiver had ever gotten from the sender. Like the kind you see when you scroll through all of your conversations to find a certain contact. And it shows the date with an arrow, but no time, which generally means that the screenshot was taken long after the fact. And the year is being shown in the date, which usually means that the screenshot was taken the following year, which in this case would be 2024, at least 5 months later. So we know the message must have been between 2 of Katie's friends, but it had to be 2 of Katie's friends who were close enough to have this exchange, but not message each other at all after. Not to mention that the name was crossed out by hand, meaning someone saw who really sent it as they manually crossed it out. Like it seems small, but I can't figure out a single plausible scenario where this is a real message, let alone one where the sender was accidentally misidentified. Now, a lot of Katie's statement also reflected on the idea of her consenting to George. More specifically, she states that because she had not given verbal consent and was drunk, there is no way she could have possibly consented. So the various moments where her behavior has been identified as nonverbal consent cannot be treated as such, because according to Katie, she sat back down next to George because she felt like she had to. She stayed when her friends left because it was the price she thought she had to pay to spend time with such large creators. She then argues that George could not interpret her body language as consent because he didn't know her well enough and therefore needed verbal consent. She also claims that she wasn't very interested in George, but was instead talking to him due to his status.
She felt lucky to be talking to a verified account, someone famous, someone I had followed and watched for a while. Now, this is not something that I was thinking about at all. I wasn't aware that she ever watched my content in the past. That was never brought up. This actually makes me feel pretty bad the only reason she was messaging me was because I have subscribers or something.
And she claims that the only reason that she didn't leave when her friend did was because Katie didn't know she was leaving, though both George and Dream claim that things happened differently.
I remember Ghosty getting up to leave and Katie getting up to say goodbye to her. I also asked Dream about this and he had the same recollection as me. Also, according to what she said, Katie and Ghosty were sharing the same hotel room together. So the obvious assumption is that they would probably leave together. The fact that she chose to stay despite not really knowing most of the people there gave me a pretty positive impression on how she felt about staying there.
George also points out and corrects moments of Katie factually stating his motives or thoughts.
Quote, "You didn't know me, apparently you didn't even know my age, but you knew what I wanted. No, he assumed it's what I wanted because why wouldn't I want that from someone like him?" This is absolutely not how I think about this kind of situation at all. I would never think like that, and honestly, it's kind of an evil way to think about things.
Katie then reflected on George's claim that they were cuddling for a while before he touched her torso by saying that he was the only one initiating this contact, though unsurprisingly, George disagrees.
I do think a lot of the cuddling was initiated by me, but some of it wasn't. I was also drunk, but my impression at the time was that it was very mutual. She also says that, quote, "I didn't know cuddling was an invitation." I don't think just cuddling is an invitation for anything. I only brought the cuddling up because it's something that she didn't mention at all in her original stream.
And here's the thing, as much as I don't want to nitpick Katie, and even if we completely ignore George's second statement, her point still has a few issues. For starters, why was their cuddling not mentioned in her original story? In fact, she originally implied that they were simply sitting near each other prior to him tickling her.
And the older guy sat right next to me while playing, and I wondered how he felt sitting so close to me, sitting next to me on the couch in front of everyone.
Never mind her repeatedly getting up and sitting back down next to him and choosing to stay after her friend had left. And that seems like a huge omission for two reasons. One, if George touching her was unwelcome, then why wouldn't an hour of cuddling also fall under assault or at least inappropriate contact worth bringing up? Two, she claims that it doesn't change anything, but for an hour of physical contact to be left out of a recollection of, well, inappropriate contact, is it just me who finds that to be a weird choice? It's hard for me to not arrive at the conclusion that this was left out because it paints the interaction in a very different light. She also uses George mentioning this to mean that he was saying she consented to things turning sexual. If I'm being honest, I feel like it's kind of disingenuous to present someone tickling your waist as things turning sexual. Like, I do think it was inappropriate, which I'll get to later, but Katie seems to use very vague language at weird times that would lead someone to believe more happened than did. And that's not me necessarily criticizing Katie or labeling her sinister, but unlike Shelby, who was incredibly direct, said her piece, and moved on, Katie is changing her story, getting caught in lies, and is dancing around points that change how one might interpret these events. And Shelby had repeatedly tried to resolve her issues with Wilbur privately and went to the internet when that failed to work because she had evidence that Wilbur would continue his abusive behavior with someone else. Meanwhile, George was intentionally kept in the dark for 8 months and was blindsided by these accusations. Like, he was even reassured at times that everything was fine. So I personally fail to see what would lead someone to believe that this public circus is a better approach than a private conversation, even if it's one held by a proxy. Like, to me, this feels like a case study on the major difference between turning to the internet as a first resort versus a last one. Like, I'm sorry, but I don't think it's unfair to point that out, especially when there's evidence that isn't holding up. And things only get messier from there. For starters, Katie refuted George's claim that she followed him to the elevator when he left the party. Basically, Katie and George seem to have finally landed on them simply having left the party at the same time. And I'm sorry, but after hearing the tellings of this moment, I don't understand why it was so emphasized by Katie. Like, her original depiction of this moment was pretty sinister, where George was following her after allegedly assaulting her.
I was still drunk, either from alcohol or tiredness. I went to leave, and the older guy decided to leave with me. We walked to the elevators, where I didn't get on. He then pretended that the elevator was broken, and that he couldn't leave, telling me to get in the elevator to prove it was broken. And then after a few minutes, he ended the night with a "guess I'm going now," leaving with a wounded puppy look.
But on the whole, George's elevator is broken bit just feels like an awkward guy wanting to spend more time with a girl he likes, gauging her interest, and then leaving when she shows disinterest like you're supposed to. So it's honestly just confusing to me why that came up at all, but whatever. Katie also claims that Dream vocalized that he didn't see any issue with George being 26 and Katie being 18. This is also apparently based on Dream saying this to someone else and that person messaging yet another person about it a few days later, but then the person went back through their messages to send it to Katie more recently. And even Katie acknowledges that it could be dishonest. So again, I don't get why it was included, but whatever. But a major piece of evidence that Katie used to claim that George knew her age was it being displayed prominently on her Instagram. And surprisingly, George had a really thorough answer for how he didn't see it.
For context, as you can see here in this screenshot, her age is actually in her display name on Instagram. So today I actually found out there are two different types of professional Instagram account. There's a creator account and a business account. And for some reason, Katie's account was a business account instead of a creator account. And weirdly enough, it actually turns out that business accounts don't display special characters from a username in the username. And you can actually see this in a picture that I sent to her during our messages, that her age is not displayed in her name. Obviously, this wasn't a feature that I knew about at the time, and I actually had to do quite a bit of research today to work that out. So I hope that could kind of clear that up a little bit, and that maybe you can see how I wouldn't have seen it.
And while that may seem minor, that is now two major pieces of evidence that Katie used to insinuate that George was acting in a predatory way that have been debunked. So whether or not these issues were intentional, it pokes a lot of holes in that narrative. That's not to say I think George is off scot-free, which I'll get to, but yeah, it does seem to at least clear him of acting maliciously or in a predatory way. Though George does own up to him not being certain of Katie's age when it was necessary.
I wasn't aware at the time that she was 18. I mentioned that they had come from an official VidCon after party, they were drunk, and I made the assumption that, knowing how these events are run, that she was probably over the age of 21, as they wouldn't have been able to drink in there otherwise. It is irresponsible of me that I made this assumption, and going forward, I will make sure to explicitly ask for a person's age. And I'm sorry, Katie, that I did not do that. And I should have asked for her age, and I am sorry that I did not. This is not a mistake that I will make again.
And if you remember Harry, who posted that Dream was preying on 18-year-olds at VidCon, Dream spoke to Katie and Ghosty about this accusation.
He reached out to Ghosty about it, asking what this was even about, and did the same to others, including Katie. Now, I'm not going to be showing Katie's text with Dream, because at the time, Dream had told her that her messages and conversation would not leave their texts. However, here is Dream and Ghosty's conversation about it. I was never brought up or mentioned at all. And also, when Dream makes fun of Harry for being ridiculous and making stuff up because nothing happened and we were all still friends, she said, exactly.
And while Ghosty has provided an explanation for why she didn't mention George,
the conversation was not about George. The conversation was about him, and it was about the underage drinking, and it wasn't ever about whether or not Katie, you know, it was always just about him and not George, which is why I said, dude, no, nothing seemed wrong, because he wasn't doing anything wrong, and I can stand by that. At the time, had seemed that Dream was one who had taken advantage of Katie, and I said he didn't, and I didn't lie.
George makes an argument for why he and Dream initially interpreted Ghosty's messages as meaning the night was a positive experience.
This is obviously said about Dream and not me, but Dream looked at this as positive about the entire experience and shared this with me. It seems like Ghosty has changed her mind about this now, but I just think it's really relevant to how we felt about the situation as a whole.
This leads to George reflecting on how, looking back, creators seem to have heard about this before it went public and started to treat him differently.
And now, after seeing Katie's follow-up, I realized that probably everyone knew about this behind the scenes. And I think that is insane. I was walking around with these people at other events or interact with them in any way, and all the time they were just thinking terribly about me, and I didn't even know, and neither did any of my friends. If I'd seen Katie in person, I would have gone up to her normally. I would have assumed we were still friends. I think this is a massive injustice to Katie. It actually kind of makes me rethink a lot of my experiences with other creators, just looking back on it with this new information.
And George provides his thoughts one last time on their age gap and the care he should have put into gaining verbal consent.
I actually do think that the age difference between me and Katie was a pretty big factor. I am older than her, and based on what she said, I do have more experience than her. She did say that the level of intimacy that we had together was the furthest that she'd experienced, but to me, it was quite tame. And when I say this, I am not trying to devalue how she feels about this at all. I'm just trying to point out that we clearly viewed things differently. And this is something that I have learned from now, and I will be taking very seriously moving forward. And I am truly sorry, Katie, for not realizing this and not taking this difference into account. Things would be very different if I could just say that I had asked her if she was comfortable and she had said yes. But the fact is, I never did ask this. And going forward, this will be something that I take into account in every interaction I have with anyone, sexual or not. I am sorry, Katie, and I'm sorry for how this will affect you going forward.
And despite how much of Katie's evidence he was able to debunk, George still ends in partial agreement with Katie's depiction of that night, but with one very key difference.
After her first statement, I actually disagreed a lot with how things were portrayed and was pretty confused by a lot of the details. But her most recent response made things a lot clearer to me. And now I do think we agree pretty much on the order of events. We just don't necessarily agree on my intentions. But again, I do really hope that her seeing this can help with that.
Which to me feels pretty sincere. Agreeing on what happened, but drawing the line of what was going on in someone's head seems more than fair. And George ends his video by acknowledging some more minor controversies that have come up against him.
First thing that I want to talk about is a comment that I made about Punz's girlfriend at the time. She was talking very similarly with Punz, essentially complaining that Punz wasn't leaving the call to go have sex with her in the shower. I do remember saying something along these lines, essentially saying, come on Punz, go have sex with your girlfriend who's begging you to go have sex with her in the shower, or someone else will. But I do understand how this could be disrespectful, and that was not my intention at all. And I am sorry to both Punz and Andy for this comment. Another thing that people criticize me for is that I didn't donate to the charity. But again, this actually isn't the case. I donated $2,000 to the charity after the event, but I did do it anonymously.
And that's really where we are now. And George's second video has been received really well on Reddit, Twitter, and YouTube, and those three websites never agree on anything. So even people who were critical of George's actions from that night have made positive statements on the video. Though it is worth noting that when releasing her Twitter document, Katie announced that she would be doing a follow-up stream, though we'll see if that changes with George's second video. So yeah, this whole thing turned into a complete fiasco, but I want to share where I'm currently at having gone through all of this. A lot of people have said that this was a situation that should be handled privately and that Katie has a sinister intention. And here's the thing, are there things about Katie's two statements that stand out to me as weird for one reason or another? Yes, there are. But I think the more interesting part of this is the failure of responsibility from Dream and George. Now look, I don't think this is a black and white situation as much as the internet always does. I think there is a lot of gray. But here's my thing. First, the whole age fiasco. If you're Dream and someone you don't know is coming into your hotel room and drinking, you don't check their age? I'm not even saying IDs have to come out, but you don't even give a quick, hey, you're 21, right? Alright, here you go. Like, forget morality. Just from a self-serving perspective, Dream would have been the most likely person to get in trouble should the cops find an 18-year-old drinking that Dream just assumed was 21. So yeah, I think it's really dumb to make that kind of assumption, especially if you're Dream. Like, with the number of BS allegations that he was dealing with at the time, it doesn't occur to him to be a little extra cautious that one more isn't added to the list? Really? Like, I'm not even trying to clutch my pearls, it just seems like a dumb oversight on Dream's part, especially when this was a small gathering. Not to mention that, yeah, I do think it's on the host of a party to make sure people aren't illegally drinking, especially people you don't know. Now, George. To be honest, I mostly find myself agreeing with Dream SMP member Sapnap. The situation does not seem to be the result of malicious intent on George's part, nor does it show that he was evil. But yeah, I do still think that George messed up. Like, if you're an incredibly famous 26-year-old at an event where the assumption should be that people know who you are and have similar enough aspirations to you that there's some kind of power dynamic, like you having the ability to make any creator famous and being at an event for creators, and then you put your hands on someone whose age you don't know, who you just met, who you've only hung out with while drinking, who you aren't getting verbal consent from. Like, does no one in this group have self-preservation? Like, even if morality isn't the responsibility, hey, is this okay? Is very easy to slip in over the course of an hour and a half. Nonverbal consent exists, but wow, it is bold to be okay with that standard in that scenario. And to a large extent, George has expressed agreement with this idea.
I've never really thought about power imbalance at all, to be honest. In that room, I wasn't thinking about, YouTube subscribers or fame or power or anything at all like that. I just saw us all as friends hanging out, having fun. Again, I'm not trying to downplay this by saying this. It is genuinely something that I'm going to be thinking about going into the future.
Also, if he did know that she was 18, then yeah, I do think this is all just creepy, but that doesn't seem to be the case as of right now. But there's another reason that I really do think that George's actions fall under stupidity rather than malice, which is that she didn't express any discomfort. Like, I'm sorry, but I don't love the precedent of saying that there is no responsibility on someone to establish boundaries for themselves or just say no. Like, as we now know this story, there is no reason to to believe that if she was uncomfortable and expressed that to George, that he wouldn't have stopped, especially since other people were in the room. I would kinda get it more if they were alone, but was the room going to erupt into a 10-way brawl if Katie sat somewhere else, or moved his hand, or said something? Like, I'm sorry, but I just don't see how George tickling Katie after an hour of cuddling warrants responses like this.
And to try and use me, my friends, or anybody else as a scapegoat for your fucking sexual abuse is disgusting!
Two things can be true at the same time. I do think that, yes, George messed up, and I also understand why this encounter may have been uncomfortable for Katie. However, I do not think that the extreme response to this was at all warranted, especially now that George has taken accountability. Like, I don't understand why this can't just serve as a learning opportunity going forward, especially for George. I don't get why tweets have been getting tens of thousands of likes by calling him a criminal and worse, or saying things like it's horrible that he responded with a pre-recorded video, because when talking about an assault, it's bad to be careful of your wording. And that's where we are now, in the middle of a very weird month for the Dream SMP. A month where one member of the Dream SMP was outed as a monster, and two were outed for engaging in a tickling. Like, man, I don't know what it is about Minecraft YouTubers, but it just seems like all of them end up being so damn weird that it honestly seems more and more like a good idea to just steer clear of that genre entirely. Then again, they do make a lot of money, so... Okay, so we're trying to speedrun the Ender Dragon, we have a bucket, we just need to find some water and lava, and... What? I never claimed to be above a good payday. Bye!